بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we have been looking and we will continue to look at the different acts of worship that Allah has taught us as Muslims to practice and to honor. And we want to have a better understanding of how it is that we should practice these devotions, these rituals, in order to best understand them and derive the maximum benefit from them. We have looked at fasting, and inshallah we will look next at salat, at the prayer. But before we begin looking at our salat and some of the adab and the etiquette and the different factors that we should bear in mind with our salat, we should pause and look at the issue of tahara. Because tahara, or purity or purification, is one of those preparatory and preliminary steps that is required before we are able to pray. In fact, for a Muslim, the preparation for the prayer is significant, and it is an act of worship itself that is not equal to the prayer, but it is important in ensuring that we will be able to derive the maximum benefit from the prayer. There are many recommendations, and we will talk about some of them when we look at salat. But before we actually begin the prayer, it is good for us to find a place where we won't have distractions, to dress in a certain way, to make sure that there aren't any pictures or statues or images in front of us. So there are different things that we should do with respect to our environment, with respect to our clothing, in order to prepare ourselves for the prayer. And the general gist of these rulings is that we want to ensure that we think of the prayer as an actual meeting with Allah. It's not something that is just a matter of a ritual. It's not just a matter of a formality. It's not just a matter of doing something in order to protect ourselves from punishment, but it is actually an invitation where we are going and we are speaking and we are finding ourselves in the presence of Allah. Now, we're always in the presence of Allah, but there are certain times when we are particularly close or particularly able to derive blessings and barakah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our prayer, that is one of those times. So tahara is important for us in order to properly prepare ourselves. And we will look briefly at some of the verses of Quran and some of the issues that pertain to tahara. There is a verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, it is verse number 222, and part of that verse is as follows. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna Allaha yuhibbu at-tawwabin wa yuhibbu al-mutatahhirin. So as part of this verse, Allah says that verily Allah loves those who repent frequently and turn to Him in penitence, turn to Him in forgiveness. وَيُحِبُّ الْمُتَطَهِّرِينَ. And Allah loves those who seek to cleanse themselves and purify themselves. Now in a hadith, it has been explained that tawbah, which is where the word tawwab comes from, one who turns penitently to Allah frequently, that refers to sins. And mutatahhirin, those who seek to cleanse themselves and purify themselves, that refers not just to sins, that is covered already in tawwabin, but that refers to those who want to be also physically pure, physically protected and removed from any kind of dirt, any kind of filth, that these aqdhar, those things which pollute our physical environment. A believer should want to be protected and should be distant from that. This is something which Islam taught as part of its combination of worldly and otherworldly benefit. It was at the time perhaps a unique message, perhaps you might think of it as even a revolutionary message, and even in our time, it is something that is very meaningful and very relevant. The idea that coming close to Allah does not involve completely separating ourselves and departing from this world. It doesn't mean that we are going to only be able to be truly pious if we wear the simplest or even the most filthy clothes, if we don't take care of our grooming, if we don't take care of our appearance, if we don't take care of our clothing and our apparel. Islam says that your purity and your closeness to Allah, it comes both from avoiding sin and also avoiding physical dirt and filth. So that is something which is part of the Islamic teaching and tradition and the sunnah of the Prophet. And it was one way which the Prophet combated those who may have had these different ascetic practices, which are found in other religions and are found in some religions and some practices even today, where purity is something superficial. Even today, you will find that there are some people who, when they want to practice a religion or they want to show that they are practicing, then they will look purely at that superficial dimension. They won't wear good clothing. They will wear the simplest clothing. They will wear the type of clothing that you would expect to see for somebody who did not have the ability to dress better. They will try to show that they are not concerned about their appearance, about combing their hair, about grooming themselves, that that's not important to them, and that somehow that might indicate that they are above these affairs. Whereas the practice of the Prophet was contrary to that. In fact, it is said in a hadith which is narrated from Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, that once when she was with the Prophet in Medina, a group of visitors came to the Prophet. And there were no mirrors as we know them today, but sometimes there would be maybe a bowl of water or something where a person could look at his reflection. The Prophet looked at his reflection, and then he began to fix his hair and groom himself, and then he left the room. Aisha says that as he was leaving the room, I said, وَأَنْتَ تَفْعَلُ ذَلِكَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ? Are you concerned about your appearance as well? You are a prophet of God. And in her mind was the idea that those who are godly people, those who are people of the other world, they're not so concerned about their worldly affairs. And the Prophet said that, no, this is something which Allah likes. It is a way of honoring Allah, and it is a way of honoring my guests in order to make sure that I am well-groomed and that I am dressed and I have taken care of myself in an attractive way before I go before them. There is a hadith of the Prophet in which he says that إِنَّ اللَّهَ جَمِيلٌ يُحِبُّ الْجَمَالِ, that Allah Himself is beautiful and Allah loves beauty. Allah has created that sense of aesthetics within us, that attraction towards beauty. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reflects Allah is the perfection of beauty. When we admire a beautiful scene in nature, when we might admire something that we find beautiful when we see it or when we hear it, or when we perceive it with our other senses, if we eat a beautiful or a tasty meal, then that is just a very imperfect and an incomplete reflection of the grandeur of God's creation and the beauty of His creation. And that the most beautiful things within God's creation, that is just a very light reflection, a shadow of the beauty of Allah Himself. And because Allah is beautiful and He is the perfection of beauty, He likes for His creation and for human beings also to appreciate beauty. And that is one way that we can worship and we can approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Quran says that there is a connection between repentance from sin and that desire to keep our physical bodies and our clothing clean. And there is a reflection. Because if we care about our physical appearance, then it reminds us that our life, our health, our bodies, and then everything that we own, it is all given to us as a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not mine. I can't do with it what I want. It is from Allah and it belongs to Allah, and therefore I must use whatever Allah has given me in accordance with His desire, in accordance with His will. And once I value the gift that Allah has given me, then it becomes much easier for me also to seek the spiritual path and to try to be a better believer. But if I don't value the most basic things that Allah has given me, if He has given me the opportunity to live and to dress well, to eat well, and I don't value those simple material blessings that Allah has given me, if Allah has given me health and Allah has given me certain other physical blessings, and I don't value those blessings, then how am I going to value the greatest blessing that Allah has given me, which is the moments of my life and the potential that I have to serve Him better through the moments of my life? It's not possible to do that. If I don't value what is convenient and what is easy and what is accessible, then I won't value that which is more involved and more detailed and requires more effort in order for me to take care of it. With respect to the revelation of this sentence in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ التَّوَّابِينَ وَيُحِبُّ الْمُتَطَهِّرِينَ, there is an interesting story which is narrated by our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. He says that it was not the practice in the people of Medina, because of their diet and because of their environment, to cleanse themselves after answering the call of nature as Muslims do. And once there was a member of the Ansar who had an evening meal and felt that to cleanse himself, he should use water. And so he did that, which was contrary to the practice of the people at that time. And the next day that revelation came to Allah, and Allah called that Ansari man to His presence. And he came somewhat fearful that, did Allah maybe find out something that I had done or that I had thought about, and is the Prophet going to criticize me for something? The Prophet said, did you do anything differently? And the Ansari, he said that this is what I did. And then the Prophet said to him, Hani'an laka. That is something which Allah would congratulate you for, that is something that Allah has appreciated, and He has narrated this verse, or He has revealed this verse, and it became a sunnah of the Muslims. So that physical care for cleanliness is something which Allah actually revealed a verse to appreciate, and it's something which Muslims should take as a matter of importance. And it's something which also separates us from the society that we live in. This is a society that might pride itself on hygiene, that might pride itself on cleanliness, but it isn't really cleanliness or hygiene that we find. There is germophobia, there is a fear of germs, and there is a fear of anything that would look or that would smell or that would appear offensive. So many people, they don't actually take care to keep themselves clean, but they make sure that they have enough deodorants and enough perfumes and enough colognes that nobody will find out whether they are clean or not. And for a Muslim, our priority and our effort is to keep our bodies, our persons, our environment and our clothing clean. And that is why the Prophet has said that even if a person cannot afford those expensive cleaning agents and perfumes and things, then water is the best itr. Water is the best purifier. It might not have that special kind of a fragrance, but it ensures that a person is clean and that a person is ritually pure and ready for worship. So the priority that we have as a Muslim is somewhat different from what we find within society. It is on the reality of cleanliness and not just on the appearance of cleanliness. And that is something that our ulama, they have mentioned, that tahara is something that we should look at as being graded, as having levels. And so I want to just very briefly talk about the levels of tahara that have been mentioned by our ulama. There is a hadith of the Prophet, Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, that is reported from him in which he said that at-tuhuru nisful iman, that purification is half of your iman. And some of our ulama have said that there are different stages of iman, there are different levels, and at every level there is an importance for purification. So the lowest level out of 4 levels that we are going to be speaking of, the lowest and the most basic level is that we purify our physical body from physical impurities and also from ritual impurities. So if we are in need of doing wudu, for example, if we have just woken up and we don't have wudu, then to do wudu, to do ghusl when we need to do ghusl. If our body has become polluted with a physical impurity, then to wash it and to take care of it. So that is the basic level and the most fundamental level of purity. That is the level at which many of us, we might think of when we speak of tahara. But that is meant, as the verse of Quran indicates, that tatahhur comes with tawbah. Purifying, it comes with seeking repentance. So the next stage, which is one stage up, and which is linked to how we keep our physical bodies, is to purify our limbs from sins, from doing evil deeds against other people, against our own soul and our own best interest, anything that is sinful, that is displeasing to Allah. So this also pertains to our physical body and our physical environment, but it is not now something that we can say this is an impurity, but it is something that attaches to our limbs and our organs themselves, to make sure that our hands don't do anything that would pollute them, that our feet don't go anywhere that would pollute them. And the same thing that applies to our eyes and to our remaining senses and our remaining limbs. That is also something which we might think of as being separate from us. But what we do is what we become. Our actions, they become part of us. Habitually and spiritually, if we continuously sin with our limbs, then our limbs, no matter how much we might wash them, they become impure in a certain sense. So the second stage of tahara and purity is for us to look at our limbs and to make sure that we are avoiding sins. And the tahara that we have been taught in order to prepare for salat, that is also in one way a reminder of how we are to keep our limbs pure in a more general sense. And so when we do wudu, one of the things that is recommended for us to do is to think about where we are putting that water, and to think about the fact that we don't just want to cleanse the outside and not think about the inside. One of the scholars of Islamic history, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, he has an example that he mentions. He says that, imagine if you're inviting guests. And so normally when people invite guests, they make sure that their house is ready. But what would you say about a person who goes outside, makes sure that the lawn is mowed and that everything on the outside looks good, and just forgets about taking care of the house inside? Inside everything is piled up. There's no one who's going to cleanse the inside. Now, yes, Sometimes your township or your neighborhood or your subdivision might get mad at you if you don't take care of the outside. But the more important thing intrinsically is to look at the inside. And when it comes to tahara, when we wash our hands, and then when we wash our face, and we wipe our head, and we wipe our feet, we are touching those limbs through which we do the majority of our actions in our daily life. So we shouldn't just be thinking about having done the wudu, but we should be thinking about making sure that those limbs are protected from sinning, from doing things that would pollute their inside. Otherwise, we can wash the outside as much as we want. But if the inside of the house is dirty and polluted, then it doesn't really have any kind of benefit. So the first stage was to purify the physical. The second stage is to purify the limbs from sinning. The third stage is to take a look at the heart and to purify it from attributes which are displeasing to Allah or which are base and lowly attributes. That is a matter of akhlaq, which is different from our outward actions. It is an action of the heart. Right? The af'alul qulub are different from the af'alul jawarih, the actions of our limbs. An example is that if I am a jealous person, when somebody else shows me something that they have, a blessing that they have been given by Allah, they might tell me that, I got a promotion today. And if I am a jealous person, I might say, you didn't really deserve it. Or, yeah, anybody can get a promotion if they are always careful of trying to impress their boss, or something like that. So that is an action which is an outward action of the limbs. There are many of us who are careful enough not to do that, either because we have a sense of shame, or because we know that we will hear something back that we don't want to hear. But then there are always those thoughts that come within our mind, if only it had been me instead of that person. Or why did Allah give it to that person and not to me? It might never show up anywhere in our actions. It might never show up in what we say or what we do to that person. But if I have the attribute of arrogance within me, even if I always bow down to others and say that I am the most humble of God's servants, but if I think that I know everything, then my heart is still polluted and is dirty and is not tahir, even if my outward limbs don't show that pollution. If I am jealous of good favor that Allah shows to you, then my heart is polluted, even if I don't show it with my limbs. So after we take care of making sure that our limbs don't do that which is wrong, we also should look at our heart, and we shouldn't make decisions or have actions of our heart or feelings of our heart that are displeasing to Allah. That is a further stage of tahara. And then the next stage of tahara goes even above the heart to alamus sir, to the deep recesses of our soul. And the effort is to make sure that we are not thinking about or prioritizing anything but Allah Himself. Whenever I think about something but Allah, whenever my goal is something worldly, something mundane, something that is transitory, that passes, and I'm not thinking about Allah, then there is a filth, there is a pollution that is there within the deep recesses of my soul. So all of these are stages of tahara. The most basic is for us to make sure that we are not dirty. Above that our limbs are not doing things that are displeasing to Allah. Above that is that our heart is not feeling things and whispering to us things which are unworthy of a good person. And then above that is that our attention in our life does not go to things which are other than Allah. So in these 4 stages, they build upon one another. If we haven't taken care of our physical environment, then it will be harder for us to properly take care of our limbs. And if our limbs are not trained not to sin, then it will be harder for us to control our heart. And if our heart has not been trained and disciplined, and if we have not taken care to avoid those things which are displeasing to Allah, then it will be very difficult for us to purify the deeper recesses of our soul and say to Allah that we will not think about anything else. Anything that comes in front of us, will distract us. So this is kind of a chart that we should keep in our mind when we think about purity and tahara in our religion. That lowest level of physical purification, it is meant as a first step and as a preparation for the higher levels of tahara. Doing so will ensure that we will be protected from waswasa and from exaggeration. When we realize that it is a means to an end, it is not an end in itself for me to do the perfect wudu, and then to do it again and again and again, and to waste water in order to make sure that the wudu superficially is done well. That is a means for me to cleanse myself and to prepare for my limbs being clean, in order to prepare for me to approach Allah. So there are some people who will spend so much time in the preliminary, they will spend so much time in wudu, and they will get distracted with waswasa and different kinds of doubts, that it will actually distract them from the prayer. Their prayer will not have that quality because they got distracted with what is before it. There are many people who get lost in the details of tahara and najasa, and worrying about what they can eat and what they can't eat, and is their environment clean or not clean, that they will be uncomfortable praying. So they might be at school, they might be at work, but they will delay the prayer, not because of an actual rule that Islam has said that you have to be careful of. If there is a najasat that has come to me, then I have to cleanse my body or my clothing before I am able to pray. But in many cases, there are needless doubts. It happened to rain, and of course when it rains, then the entire city becomes najis. And so I will delay my prayer, or I won't say my prayer properly because of that waswasa. When we understand the purpose of tahara, then we won't get distracted by the superficial and then forget the purpose for which those commandments have been given. And it will also prevent exaggeration. It will keep us balanced. And it will, inshallah, allow us to be able to benefit from that tahara. So let us look briefly now at some of the teachings that we have with different parts of our tahara. I won't go into many of the details, but the first is the rules of how we should purify ourselves when we use the restroom. There are several acts which are recommended and which we should bear in mind, so that even that act can become a spiritual act. It is said in a hadith that Musa alayhi salam said to Allah, Ya Rab, hunaka halat ujilluka an ukhatibaka fiha. That there are certain places, there are certain times within my life that I feel that you are too great for me to speak to you in those times. Maybe when we aren't in the best state, when we are not as clean or as pure as we would like to be. And the answer that was given by revelation to Musa alayhi salam is that, Ya Musa, don't be afraid to speak to me at any time, wherever you might be, whether you feel that you are clean or you are unclean, whether you feel that you are ready or you are not ready. You don't have to have done wudu and gone to your musalla and be in an environment of prayer to speak to Allah. He is with you always. He is listening to your call always. And there is never a time in our life when we should be embarrassed that right now I'm not decent. Right now is not the time to speak to Allah. So even those most basic and those most base times in our life, they are a spiritual opportunity. There is a hadith that when a person uses the restroom, that an angel will come to a person and will speak to that person, even if we don't always perceive and we're not attentive to hear that voice. The angel will say, Ya ibn Adam, هذا رزقك فانظر من أين أخذته وإلى أين صار. That, O descendant of Adam, this is your rizq. So take attention, take care now to note, where did you get it from and what has become of it? Many of us, we go through great lengths in order to enjoy some of the finer things in life. But then we don't realize that those finer things in life, they might not all pass immediately. A meal that I eat, no matter how sumptuous a meal it might be, I can't keep it forever, and if I eat it, it won't stay in my body forever. But even things that we can maybe hold on to a little bit longer, it might be a year, it might be a few years, they are all transitory. And that is symbolized and it is reminded whenever a person answers the call of nature. The angel says that this is your rizq. You might have gotten distracted by obtaining it from your religious obligations. You may have cut corners. So in the future, be aware. Where are you getting it from? And be aware that it is all transitory. And so it is a spiritual moment to remember that everything in this world is transitory. Allah has honored human beings, but He has also created us in a certain way that we are constantly reminded that our physical constitution is something which is of this world. It is not meant to be permanent. And that should spur us on to give greater importance to our soul, which was created to be eternal, which was not created to disintegrate and to come to an end. At that time, it is said that it is recommended for a person to say, Allahumma rzuqni al-halal wa jannibni al-haram. That, oh Allah, grant me what is halal and give me safety from all that is haram. So that is a dua that we should give, we should make at any time whenever we answer the call of nature. The next act of worship which is important for a Muslim is wudu. Now, for many Muslims, wudu is simply something that we do without really thinking about it when we want to get ready for prayer. When it's time for prayer, then we think that wudu is the preparation and the preliminary for prayer. But it is an act of worship in its own right. It is something which is not just a wajib ghairi or mustahab ghairi, but it is mustahab nafsi. It has its own intrinsic value, and we should give importance to it. There are numerous ahadith which state that a person should try, if it is possible for us, to be in a state of wudu for as long as we can. In fact, there is a hadith that is from the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, that whenever a person finds that they have broken their wudu, if you wake up from sleep, for example, then if the first thing that you do is that you do wudu, and then with that wudu you also do a 2 rak'at prayer, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive whatever sins that you may have committed. So this is something which is a matter of spiritual readiness and recommendation in and of itself. And to be da'imul wudu, to be always in a state of wudu, is something which is very good. It is recommended that before we do wudu, when we are preparing for prayer, we also brush our teeth. And that is something which has been associated by the Prophet with readiness for worship. So here again, we often think of hygiene as being simply something which protects us from getting sick, from being harmed by germs. And Islam wants us to think of tahara as something more sublime. It has the benefit of keeping us protected from those harms, but it's something more sublime as well. Similarly, many of us, we think of brushing as something which is to keep our teeth healthy and protect them from decaying. Some of us, we might really only remember to brush when we feel that pain within our mouths. But in Islam, we are told that think of even these aspects of purity and hygiene as something more sublime. There is a hadith of the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. He says that إِنَّ أَفْوَاهَكُمْ طُرُقُ الْقُرْآنِ فَطَيِّبُوهَا بِالسِّوَاكِ. That your tongues, your mouths, they are the pathways of the Qur'an. So keep them always clean with miswak. Keep your mouth pure, especially before your prayer when you are going to do wudu, in order so that when you recite the Qur'an, and the hadith continues, that when you recite the Qur'an, there are angels that Allah disperses in a line to take every word that you recite and to hold that word of the Qur'an. It is a harf min huruf kalamillah, of the words of the Creator. And that angel protects each letter and then takes it directly to the heavens and shows it to Allah. So you want to make sure that when you recite the Qur'an, that it is going up in the very best possible manner. So before wudu, it is recommended And before every prayer, it is recommended to do miswak, to brush one's teeth. And if we're not able to do so with a brush, then it is recommended in a hadith even to use your fingers, but to symbolically remember that that is part of the sunnah of the Prophet. Then it is recommended for a person to mention the name of Allah before doing wudu. There is a hadith of the Prophet that he says that wudu can, this is a hadith of Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, that if you do wudu and you mention the name of Allah, then it is like a ghusl. And the hadith of the Prophet is that a person who does wudu and they mention the name of Allah and they are attentive in their wudu, then their entire body is purified by Allah during that wudu. It's not just a matter of cleansing those parts of the body, those limbs that we actually wash within the wudu. But if we don't do that, if we still do our wudu but we're not attentive, we don't remember Allah and we're not thinking of Allah during our wudu, then that wudu will only reach really those limbs that are directly clean within the wudu. There are several specific times when it is especially recommended to do wudu. As I said, it is good to have wudu at all times. But one time when it is especially good for us to do wudu is whenever we have a haja that we want to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. So if you are going to try to accomplish something and you are worried about whether it's going to be able to be fulfilled, if you have something, an exam that you are going to, if you have a job interview that you are going to, if you have a task to accomplish and you're uncertain about whether it will be accomplished or not, one of the very best things that you can do is to first do wudu before you go and perform that task. The hadith of Imam Ja'far Sadiq says that if you have a haja and you go and try to fulfill that haja, haja means that if you have any worldly task, anything that you need to get done. So if you have a task and you try to fulfill that task without doing wudu, if that task is not fulfilled by Allah, then blame only yourself. That is a means to have the task fulfilled. And it is especially recommended to do a wudu, in particular in preparation for Maghrib prayer and for Fajr prayer, not to just continue with a wudu that you might have before. Sometimes the imams would be with their companions, they would pray Asr, for example, and then they would sit and talk for a time until Maghrib would come. And then when Maghrib would start, the imam would often call for water and then he would do wudu. And he would offer that water to his companions as well. And in one instance, the companion said that, well, I still have my wudu that I prayed Asr with. And the imam replied that if you do wudu when you pray Maghrib, then that will be a kaffara for any sins that you committed in the past during the day until Maghrib time, except for kaba'ir. Major sins, that requires a special attentiveness from Allah in order to have them forgiven. But the minor mistakes and sins, they can be compensated for by wudu. And when you do wudu for Fajr, even if you were already awake, and you had already, for example, been reciting Qur'an or performed Salatul Layl before that, then that is a kaffara for any of the sins that you might have done until then during the night. So those two times of doing wudu, specifically for Fajr prayer and for Maghrib prayer, that is a kaffara for the day and for the night. So two times when it is especially beneficial to keep wudu is number one, for any hajat that we have, and number two, before these two prayers in particular, even if we already have wudu. Otherwise, of course, we have to make that preparation for any of our acts of worship. It is also recommended to do wudu before we go to bed and to go to sleep in a state of wudu. And the hadith says that a person who does that will go to bed in a state of wudu. They will be considered to be in a state of tahara until they wake up, and also they will be in a state of ibadah and dhikr until they wake up. So if we are able to do wudu, the last thing that we do before we go to bed, that is also highly recommended. The next act of worship that I'm sure you are familiar with is ghusl, and I will just mention one of the recommended ghusls, that is the ghusl of Friday. It is not wajib, but doing a ghusl on Friday is so highly recommended that many ahadith speak of it as being wajib. Ghuslul Jum'ati wajib. The term has been used to mean that it is very highly recommended, to the extent that the imams used to tell people that if you forget to do Ghusl Jum'ah, for example, if you're praying at home, and you pray Dhuhr prayer, then if you still have time, do the ghusl and repeat the prayer that you have done in order to do that prayer with ghusl. The wisdom for that ghusl, it has been mentioned in one hadith that just like Allah has taught us to do the nafilah prayers to complete the deficiency in our wajib prayers, and just as Allah has told us to fast the nafilah fasts to complete the deficiency in our wajib fasts, so ghusl al-jum'ah completes the deficiency in our tahara that we might have had during the week. So that is to compensate for that deficiency. It is something which is very highly recommended. If we are not able to do so at the ideal time is on the day of Friday between Fajr and Zawal time, when the time for Dhuhr prayer begins. If you are not able to do so, then it is permitted to do the Ghusl Jum'ah on Thursday, to do it a day early in preparation, if you won't have water or if you'll be traveling and you won't be able to do the ghusl on time. And if a person misses it, then it is also recommended to make it up on Saturday. So ghusl Jum'ah is for men and for women, for all members of society, whether you are going to Salatul Jum'ah or whether you're not going to be going to Salatul Jum'ah. It is something that all of us should try to do at every Friday. It is said that Imam Ali alayhi salatu was salam, when he used to want to criticize a person for being careless about their religious affairs or not being worthy of their religious practice, then what he would say is, "Wallahi la anta a'jazu min tarik al-ghusl yawm al-jumu'ah." That you are a person who isn't even able to do ghusl on the day of Friday. An easy thing to do, something which has a world of benefits and barakah for our worldly well-being and for our spiritual well-being, and completes our acts of worship during the week. And if a person isn't able to do that, then in the eyes of the Imam, that is a symbol of a person who does not really take their religion seriously and is not able to benefit from their religion. And then one final note with ghusl: if you have a haja, it is also good to do ghusl before you do salatul haja if you are going to pray for your haja. And also if you have an istikhara, if you need to seek the assistance of Allah in something. Istikhara here not in the sense of opening the Quran, but istikhara in the sense that, oh Allah, I am intending to do this. I am intending to, for example, start a new business and I need your assistance. Then before you make that intention to do ghusl is highly recommended. So these are some of the dimensions of tahara. It is a reminder for us that our physical purity and our spiritual purity, they are interrelated. And our physical purification of our body, our wudu, our ghusl, our cleanliness, that is preparation for our limbs and for our hearts and for our very souls to be purified. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant all of us external and internal, exoteric and esoteric, true piety and true purity. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us with Muhammad wa ali Muhammad in the hereafter.